Today's sermon is titled Enemies of Apathy, The Rise of Factionalism in Religion and Politics, to be delivered by Stephen Lloyd Moffett. Dr. Lloyd Moffett is a professor of religious studies at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, with a MA and PhD in religious studies from UC Santa Barbara and a Master's of Theology from St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary. Dr. Lloyd Moffett has spent his career enlightening his students and community about religions of the world. Outside of school, he loves to build interesting structures, tend to his vineyard, and make wine and beer. He recently published a book entitled Spirit of Wine and the Spirit of Winemakers. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to bring you the esteemed Dr. Stephen Lloyd Moffett.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks for having me again. It is become like the pilgrimage to Cambria to work through my thoughts, and it's a privilege to be up here. I have to say that one of the blessings of my job is that I stay up with what students are thinking and their spiritual lives, and I have them always write a sort of short spiritual autobiography. Sometimes they're funny, like this one of my students said, I come from 4 generations of faithful Mormons, which is nice, except for he had the typo, so he wrote, I come from 4 generations of faithful morons. Which I think is so emblematic of America generally. But they are an interesting lot to read, and now I've got 16 years of students' stories. A couple of years ago, I began to see something slightly different, though. For the first time, I was reading a spiritual autobiography, and a student talked about how they found this bizarre tradition of an Indian guru who lived in Russia when they were 13 on YouTube. And they began to spend all their time, they began to flunk out of high school because their whole life was dedicated to watching YouTube with this teacher. And it was a year and a half, the parents finally took this student to counseling because they're like, without knowing actually that he had been so involved in this group online. It was the counselor had to tell the parents, and he actually stepped away from school for a little bit to recover. And I was like, man, who spends that much time on YouTube? But Gen Z spends 95% of Gen Z say they will never, the one technology they can't live without is YouTube. And what you see on YouTube is not, I mean, yes, there is, the Pope's message and others, but that's not what they're seeing. They're seeing quite a few really sort of extreme religious perspectives. And for the 13 to 18-year-olds, they can't really tell the difference. And so I began to think, what is this? What's happening now? Because now I've seen this like 3 or 4 times in the last couple of years where people in their spiritual autobiography tell me that they discovered something on YouTube and this sent them down the rabbit hole of their life. So I was thinking about that, but also I get a lot of discussion about just why we're so polarized with each other. I mean, it just seems like not only are we polarized, but we're angry with each other. It seems like part of America is inhabiting a totally different universe than another part of America. It used to be, men are from Mars and women from Venus, but we're all in the same universe. I think today, some people just seem so out there that sort of they're in a different universe. So how did we get there? How did we get to this polarization? And these 2 lines came together for me most recently. And so what I want to do is sort of show how some fundamental perspective of how society works has been shifting for me, and it helps me understand these 2 phenomena side by side. So let me try to explain this. So my degree is in comparative religion, but undergrad I was an economics major, and I tend to think everything is about, I see it through the lens of competition. Right, so Buddhists versus Baptists, Chipotle versus Chick-fil-A, Biden versus Trump. It seems that choice is so integrated into our society. And at one point, I even sketched out a university that would be just, the only major would be choice studies. because it just seems like everything goes down to the choices that we make, right? And it seems to me that most of society buys into this. Everybody seems to be trying to shape the choices that we make. Rhetoric and teaching are about influencing choices. There's a marketplace of competing goods, but there's also a spiritual marketplace, a marketplace of ideas. Candidates are fighting with each other for our vote. Evolution would even suggest that there's competing genes with each other. Life has always seemed to be about competition and making choices. But more recently, I've begun to doubt this framework. The reality is that while we may have many choices available to us at any given time, and we can look back on certain important decisions that we make, most of the time, we actually default to the same set of choices again and again. If I were to ask you, my guess is most of you have been using the same dishwashing detergent for 20 years. Most of you go to the same handful of restaurants again and again. Polls show that people's religious views are pretty set by the age of 25. And if you identify as Democrat or Republican, the candidates from the opposing party really don't have a lot of choice. We talk about independent voters, but they're really just low information or low attention voters. You probably sleep on the same side of the bed for the last 20 years. You probably had the same set of breakfasts for the last 20 years. You've either loved or hated rom-coms for most of your life. So I'm hesitant to put a number on it, but I think like 99% of our choices are actually made already. We really don't make as many choices as we think. And so why is there $250 billion in advertising if true choices are so rare in people's life? Well, here's what I've come to realize is that there's not so much competition between products, ideas, religions, or candidates. It's largely between doing nothing and making a choice. The fight against apathy has become the defining battle of our era. And it seems like every part of our society has come to this conclusion. In religion, the vast majority of effort today is not spent on knocking on doors or handing out pamphlets at farmers markets. On the one hand, it rarely works. But when I talk to pastors and rabbis and imams, what they are not worried about is they're not worried about dramatic conversions, but that you'll just stop attending and slowly stop being involved. That's why there's so much pressure from religious leadership to get involved. Volunteer at your parish ministry, get involved in the parish council, join a small group, because getting involved means that you'll stay engaged. The greatest fear is not from switching religions, but that your involvement declines. And so the competition for religion is not you suddenly become Buddhist or you suddenly become Jewish or something, but it's morning NFL games, sleeping in, running errands, right? How do you keep people engaged in religion is what people are talking about. Same thing driving political campaigns. When you look at campaigns, what they've come to realize, it's not really about candidate versus candidate as if there's a choice. The key to winning campaigns is getting your voters to the polls. It is engagement with your voters. There's very, very few really undecided voters. And the reality is the key to winning is getting those sort of leaners on your side to actually show up at the polls. This is also the business world. Yes, there's still Coke versus Pepsi, but if we go back to Coke versus Pepsi challenge, almost nobody switched, right? Nobody was suddenly like, oh, Pepsi's great. We don't change products very often. And so much of the advertising is about trying to get you to use your product more. If you've seen these ads, you wash your dishes every night. Why? So you use more of it. There's so much of this. And that's why clothing companies really are for fashion trends. Because there's more fashion trends, the more likely you need to update your wardrobe and buy it. If you're wearing the same clothes for 20 years, they don't have a market. The reality is most companies have learned the most effective way is to get people to use your product more rather than to try to get people to change products. So in every realm of our life, there's a huge battle for our attention. And the scarcest natural resource today is our focus, time, and attention. And the most successful entities in America are master manipulators of our attention. So Netflix realized that if you release a whole series at once and automatically start the next episode, people are going to stay up way later than they think they're going to, right? Because it's just going to be the default. Bars have realized if you have cheap drinks early in the evening, then people stay and order food and buy the more expensive drinks later in the evening. Stores like Costco and IKEA have realized if you put the entrance in one place and the exit at the other place, and you make customers walk through whole aisles of things, they get tempted by things. Churches realize that if you don't just have Sundays, but you have potlucks and you have all these things afterwards, people stay all day. And everything has to be a once in a lifetime opportunity. The most important thing you'll ever do, put it in all caps because it's so important to get your attention. See, almost every facet of life is engaged in a pitched battle for our attention. Now, the battle for attention is, on the one hand, one of the oldest games in the book. Ancient Greeks talked all the time about how certain philosophical schools like the Cynics would do stunts so that people would listen to them, because otherwise, just another philosopher on the corner, right? In ancient Greece, they talk about politicians doing these outrageous things to try to get people to listen to them because nobody was paying attention to them in ancient Greece. And so, if you look at it, the basic levers to get people to pay attention have always been the carrot and the stick. My field of religion has long had the power of the stick. If you fear, guilt, and shame people, these have been motivations to stay involved. Come to our church or you'll spend eternity in hell. What would the rabbi think if you skipped Yom Kippur? You bring shame to the family name if you do so-and-so. Rather than going to the temple. For many, many generations, these were the motivators that got people to pay attention to religion. By contrast, modern advertising are masters of the carrot. Your life is going to be sexier, happier, and altogether better if you buy whatever product they're selling. Have a Coke and a smile, buy a Happy Meal, Disneyland, where dreams come true. All these messages come down to the same. The quality of your life depends upon you buying our product. But what I've come to realize more recently is the greatest advancement in modern times has been in the science of attention manipulation. Because as our competition for time has an attention increase, so the means to manipulate it has gotten better. So think about this. 200 years ago, the 9 o'clock hour was pretty simple in most people's homes. There was a book to read, maybe a story to tell around the fire. If you're in the city, maybe there was something you could do, but not much went on. But think about the 9 o'clock hour now in slow. There's literally hundreds of channels of TV, hundreds of newspapers, magazines. You can drive to do errands because stores are open at 9 o'clock. Theaters are there, sports arenas there, bars, late night Taco Bell. Plus, you can text, Zoom, or call your friends and family from around the whole world. You can sit in a hot tub or a sauna. You can still read a book or sit around a fire. I mean, there's just so many more options for modern humans at the 9 o'clock hour. And so the competition for our attention has increased exponentially. And so every group vying for our attention has had to try to get better. Yet social media have been the masters of the art of attention manipulation. They have advanced the science of getting our attention. In our battle for attention, these companies hold the weapons of mass distraction. And if we go back to the late 2000s, this is really a critical time because you have tech companies like Facebook, YouTube, soon to be joined by Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, who are working on the same business model that most media had landed on. That is, offer your product for free or close to free and make money on advertisements. Now, the new media like YouTube and Facebook and the old media such as Fox News, CNN, New York Times are all trying to offer advertisers the most eyes looking at their ads. All the companies that influence us, they don't exist to educate us. They don't exist to promote civil discourse. They're not here to push democracy. They exist to make money for investors by luring our unsuspecting eyes to their advertisement. Remember the old adage that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. For almost all things online, we don't pay for it. And so what Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok do is sell us to advertisers. Their primary mode of existing is selling our attention to the highest bidder. So all these companies had to figure out how to be most engaging. I mean, look at the percentage of revenue that comes from advertising for Facebook, TikTok, Google, search YouTube, and Twitter. I mean, they are in the advertising distribution business. That is what they do, right? And so what they're trying to do is to get engagement. So this is different ways of engaging, but what they're selling is our attention online. Now, in the battle for attention, the new media on the internet had an advantage over the old media because CNN puts out one broadcast, right? And they're hoping people pay attention to it, but they only have one product to sell out. New York Times puts out one edition or maybe a couple editions, right? Time Magazine has one chance a week to see if you do it. And what they do is the people are successful in that have their pulse on the market and put something good. By contrast, new media has the options of running experiments constantly to see what pushes engagement. So Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and TikTok have done hundreds of millions of small experiments that all work more or less in the same way. And let me try to explain with an example from 2009 or so. So let's say 2009, you're an 18-year-old boy and you go to YouTube to learn how to complete the Rubik's Cube, a classic 2009 18-year-old boy thing to do. So what does YouTube do? They want you to click on another video, right? They want more engagement, but they don't know what video will be popular. So what they do is they conduct a little experiment. 100,000 of the original 400,000 viewers will get how to, do video games because young boys like video games. 100,000 will get worldwide wrestling because that's another, boy thing that they have the idea. Another 100,000 will be like, well, maybe they want to go to Disneyland. So let's put in something, tips and tricks of Disneyland. Another 100,000 are going to get funny cat videos because who doesn't like funny cat videos, right? So they run this little experiment and then the algorithms pay attention to what was actually clicked. So let's see what got clicked. And then what's going to happen is the next 100,000 viewers are going to get pushed the one that had the most active engagement after all, right? And so in this example, young men click the video are going to see suggestions from now on about the top 10 video games. Now, notice here, the goal of this experiment is nothing other than to increase time on the site, right? To optimize engagement. They're not employing psychologists or advertising executive to guess what people like. They're simply trying to run an experiment to see what was actually clicked. And so these platforms learned what types of videos people watch more and what types of videos they just turned off and went on to something else. And after conducting these little experiments millions of times, they solved for the exact best video to follow the previous one to entice people to stay on YouTube, right? Again, they don't care what that video is. They are just trying to get you to keep clicking, right? In fact, the founder of Netflix said, we are at a war with sleep, right? Because what they're trying to do is to figure out what is going to keep you up and keep watching Netflix. So here we're at the point of trying to understand the polarization of factionalism, because what kind of videos seem to attract the most? Well, one of the things we learn from the YouTube is people like lists. That's why there's all these top 10 horror films, 5 best ad campaigns in the 1990s, top 10 songs from your birth year. People like lists. People love scandals and gossip, right? Tabloid journalism has learned this, for years. People love scandals. True crime. People, the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads, translates to the digital world. It turns out that, rubbernecking for a train wreck is something we do online too. And yes, people love cute animal videos. You know, hippo babies, quirky cats, dogs dressed as historical figures gets a lot of clicks. And so far, this is not surprising psychologically for us, right? These are all things are pretty predictable. But what gauged the most attention was outrage at another group. So let's go back to this example, the Rubik's Cube video. What they discovered with 18-year-old boys in the late 2000s was it didn't matter what video you put after or what the video was, the #1 clicked video was always an anti-women video, an anti-feminism video. Every single time. It didn't matter if it was Rubik's Cube, it didn't matter if it was video games. Every single time, the video that won that little experiment was the lies of modern of feminism, why women hate gamers, stupid thing women gamers do, women can't ride bikes, biggest women crashing videos. Every single time. It seems like when teenage boys are alone in their parents' basements, they want to feel good about why women seem to be rejecting them outside of the basement. They clicked on videos that demonized women. Women were the out group to teenage gamer boys. And why the platforms are not as are no longer dominated by teenage boys, the basic paradigm plays out on social media the last decade. What machines learn about our habits is the more outrageous the claim framed in terms of a threat to your identity group, the more likely you are to click on it. Some psychologists call this out-group animosity. So Islamic terrorists are planning to kill Americans. Immigrant children are sneaking through the borders and into your small town. Liberal teachers erase history. Evangelical Christians want to replace the Constitution with the Bible and persecute atheists. Sharia law is influencing America. White supremacists are on the rise and aiming for your biracial children. Government mandated vaccines are poisoning your children. Seniors are going to face death boards to regulate healthcare. Critical race theory is coming into the world. You see, algorithms reveal that Americans click videos or click headlines that capture our attention are the ones that are perceived as some threat to your group. So every group, seniors, mothers with children, Republicans, Democrats, Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, gamers, rural whites, Asians, African Americans, patriots, sci-fi, every group has some opposing group. And what the algorithms show is you click videos demonizing your opposing group. Algorithm learns that we pay attention when any group you identify with are revealed to be the target of some sinister plan. Demonize another and people engage. If it's enraging, it's engaging online. Now, evolutionary biologists aren't surprised by this. There's a strong genetic advantage to groups who are keen observers of a mortal threat on the outside. And so there may be something that we're sort of pre-programmed to detect for threats to our group. But it's led to Americans being fed a steady diet online of moral outrage of people who are different than us. Scare people and they'll keep their eyes on something long enough to digest another commercial. Enrage people and they'll spend time watching 2 or 3 commercials. Stoke moral outrage and you can sneak a dozen ads in between. The goal is to increase the number of minutes that people are staring at media, make you an addict if you can, and thus multiply the number of ads you can sell and the money you take in. Again, the algorithms didn't care what the videos were. All they're trying to do is to keep you online. And this outgroup animosity seems to have been the key to gauging, creating engagement. Now, this has become worse over the past 5 years. By the way, also, I'd say, this is something that Trump learned in all his years of being on The Apprentice. It didn't matter if what he said was right on The Apprentice. You just say something outrageous and people keep watching, right? And that's how our psychology tends to work. The last 5 years has been worse because more of our life is online. Our window into reality is shaped more by Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and Twitter than it has been. We went in the last 5 years from engaging with 90 minutes of social media today per day on average to 150 minutes per day on social media. That's about 15% of our day is spent on social media. Of course, this trend was accelerated by COVID, where we literally couldn't walk with our neighbors. But remember, all this engagement online, they're not here to educate us or to inform us or make us good citizens. They're there to sell advertising. Yeah, there's our average time on social media. Second of all, with more of our life online, they know more about us because we now buy our movie tickets online. We put in Google Maps where we go, so they know where we shop. They know what shows we watch, to whom we donate, and so much more. And so what social media groups have figured out is there's not just two Americas, red and blue, but there's 2,000 or more subgroups, because there's a group to which you belong, and each one of those subgroups has an opposing group, right? So ever more powerful computers running ever sophisticated engagement experience know exactly what headlines will be clicked for the pickleball playing, Apple phone buying, parents of adult kids with no jobs, centrist Democrats who had been Republican rom-com watchers. There is something there. Do you want to supercharge that group? Put a headline that says Texan communities ban pickleball, says it emasculates men. Just watch the number of clicks with a headline like that, right? And so we have become so segmented that, and the reason why they're segmenting us is to sell us advertising, and the way to keep that engagement is to find the opposing group and say something horrific about them. Third of all, I think we've become desensitized to outrage and hyperbole. I mean, media's face a basic environment of similar to people going deaf. If you start going deaf, you turn up the music, you turn up everything to hear it better, but that increases your deafness. And so you turn it up more and you're in this spiral. Well, I think something like that is happening with this battle for our attention. I mean, 6 years ago, if Donald Trump said something about immigrants that's outrageous, all of us clicked. We're like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody would say that. You click. Now it's like, really? Again? Like, is it even worth clicking on anything he says now? Like, we've desensitized ourselves. So how do you get attention? You have to stoke it up one more level. You have to say something more outrageous to break through the noise. And so I think there's this sort of polarization outrage spiral that we're in, where we're increasingly being segmented into little tiny groups that have opposing groups. They know that the algorithms show that outrage stokes engagement, and yet we're desensitized to the normal levels of outrage. So we've got to make it worse and worse. Right? And what's happening is everybody seems to be learning the lessons of social media. And so now what the politicians learn is, if you want to get engagement, figure out who your voters are opposed to and say something awful about them, right? Get them engaged. Because I mean, politics is one of our most pure forms of a competition for attention, right? So, and so all of these areas, whether it's businesses, religion, politics, have learned that the way to break through the noise is to stoke moral outrage at another. So over the past decade, let me just bring this together here. We live in a world where our most precious commodity is our time and our attention. Religious institutions, political institutions, consumer brands, media, they're all fighting for our limited bandwidth. And the great social media experiments of the last decade and a half revealed that the most effective way to break through the noise is to expose your group to some existential threat of a group you identify with. So the degree of polarization and rage in our society is testament to just how effective the strategy is. That is, they know how to keep us involved. So what can we do? Well, I'm not going to be naive enough to think that we should just delete social media altogether and change our media habits. I don't think Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are going to discover a heart and make their companies nonprofits, creating good. So I love that, but I don't think it's going to be. But I think what we do need to do is just become more aware. That is, aware that our window into the world is not being shaped by people who are there to educate us or prepare us to be good citizens, but they're trying to capture our attention as best they can. We need to be aware that our window in reality is filtered through these machine algorithms that have learned that division leads to dollars and polarization leads to profits. So when we see headlines or stories, we need to remind ourselves that they're engaged in primarily in a ploy to get us to not take a walk, to talk to a friend, or read a book. We need to be aware of the goals of the people feeding us the information. And I think as much as possible, we need to get out of those filtered realities and return to actual reality, where we can learn from people from across the aisle who may algorithmically seem to be opposed to us. Because the reality is, when we actually talk to our neighbors, there's often much more complex than the algorithmically designed caricatures designed to stoke outrage in us. They may be divisive because they're on receiving the same stimulus from social media companies. But if we burrow down more, we actually have so much in common with people across our communities. And maybe instead of dwelling on the 1% that divides us, we can search for things in common and cherish it. Because in the end, I think that the unity that our verses and our songs speak of is something we actually do cherish, and we don't understand why we're being so divisive towards each other. So what I hope for is, in the end, that when I read the spiritual autobiographies of my future students, it won't be that they are lured into some extreme religious viewpoint from some guru in Guam, but instead that they started talking to somebody at a coffee shop or at the grocery store. And that conversation led to getting a coffee together and maybe a beer together. And eventually they ended up being together at a wonderful place like this, being a part of a community like you have here at the Unitarians. And that's their spiritual biography. I hope that.